Tonight I am going to be talking about the chapter in the book we're studying, chapter 5, Relationship to Reality, and the book is How to Do Life. The first part of this chapter, he talks about a review of the preceding chapters. First of all, he says that extending ourselves to others enhances our psychological and spiritual development. This is a very important point. He's gone over this in great detail previously. The second thing is that by cultivating positive emotions, this leads to good actions. It enriches our lives and it gives meaning to our lives. And that's very important, that these positive emotions create bonds with people, and negative emotions cause disharmony, distance. They harm relationships and even can cause relationships to break up. These positive emotions have a natural healing effect. They promote openness, they promote self-confidence, and this makes relationships easier. And of course, love and compassion are very positive emotions, and they bring all kinds of other positive emotions automatically, cause them to arise. Here is a quote: "The beauty of positive emotions is that we can bring these into existence by ourselves. We do not have to receive them from others in order for them to manifest. We don't have to wait for someone to love us before we can give love." Through positive emotions that we experience self-worth, we become enabled and self-sufficient, and this leads us to do something significant and meaningful. So what is doing something significant and meaningful? It's as simple as extending yourself to another person, doing something to welcome another person, listening to another person. He says sharing small gifts, encouraging words, generating good thoughts. All of this is significant. I'm actually reminded of a time when I was in Tibet at Trangu Monastery, and I think this incident happened in an airport. Now, this was after Traleg Rinpoche died, but I was with his widow, Khandro Traleg, and there was another couple with us. The man was a 3-year retreat Lama, and he was with his wife, and he mentioned, well, the wife was gone doing something or another, that they had just been in a store and there was something that his wife spent a lot of time examining and looking at it. And then she put it down, and Khandro Traleg immediately said, "You should have bought that little thing and given it to her. You never know how long that person is going to be," I think she said, "alive." So that's the point, that even small little gifts, it's not making a big deal and big gifts, but just small little gifts are important. They're encouraging, they're positive. On the other hand, dark moods, negative emotions, these arise when we don't connect properly with others and with the material world. There's lots of different ways that we can connect with other people that are positive and meaningful, that help others. He, needless to say, strongly encourages us to go this direction. He says that these actions are praiseworthy, ethically sound, and the right action. But the benefit goes way beyond this. It's not just a matter of that you are behaving properly, that the benefit is way, way beyond this. Then he goes into the main topic of this chapter, and it begins by talking about how to lead a fulfilling life from a Buddhist perspective. He begins this section by saying everyone has a fundamental personal philosophy of life, a view of themselves, a view of others, a view of the world, what's important, what's not, goals, and that it's good to contemplate this, to really understand this personal philosophy. This can help us understand ourselves better, where we're coming from, and so forth. And if we combine that with what was discussed previously in the book, this leads to greater wisdom. Here is a quote about this kind of wisdom. Quote, "Wisdom comes from contemplating what is real, what is not real, what is ultimately real, what is relatively real," end quote. And so our beliefs about these matters have a tremendous effect on our lives. In order to develop wisdom, we need to develop insight. Now, continuing in that direction, that we experience the world through our five senses. And if we examine this input from the five senses, we will see that there is constant change. Often it is subtle, maybe even indetectable from one moment to the next. This constant change reminds me of a Greek philosopher, Heraclitus. You might say his claim to fame is how much he talked about impermanence. He is the one that said you can't step into the same river twice. What he was conveying by saying this was, first of all, the river is constantly flowing and therefore constantly changing. If you step in one time and then step out, when you step in again, it's a different river. And also, the person that steps in the first time is now a different person because they've stepped in the river already once, and now they're stepping in it a second time. So this is a very, very important point about how things are constantly changing. Right now, it's very obvious with the leaves around this part of the country, since they are changing color, that autumn is upon us and the seasons are changing. Needless to say, the temperature changes from the time you get up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night. And when you're asleep, it still keeps changing. It's really important how we process this sensory input, because it's not the sensory input that is as important as how our mind cognizes what we do, how we add to the sensory input, because it's shaped by our fixations, our obsessions. He talks about our vision is unclear and blurred, and it's narrowed like we have blinders on. He used blinkers. I'm thinking blinkers are the same as blinders. So we don't see what's happening. You might say we see what we're looking for. And what came to my mind was driving out here at night in the country. You can drive a long time out here in the dark and never see an oncoming car. If you have your lights dimmed, you see a very, very small spot in front of you, not much in the distance and not much to the side. You put your brights on, you see much more, especially with these modern lights that are on cars now. But then if you drive in full sunlight, you see even much more. The analogy is that most of us are seeing with just our dim lights on at best, seeing just what's in front of us or what we think is important in terms of what's in front of us. And we add to that our judgments, our fixations, our hope and fear, and life gets extremely complicated very quickly. We don't experience things fully and properly. Another point that he doesn't mention about our five senses that I'm going to bring up, and that is that dogs have a much better sense of smell than humans do. A dog can smell much more than we do. Scientists have developed telescopes, microscopes, and all kinds of instruments that see much more than our human eye can see. And so we're also limited by our senses in terms of what information we get. Since we don't experience life fully and properly, we live in a fantasy world. We experience really what's in our mind, not what is out there. The Tibetans really like hot peppers, so do the Indians. I grew up in a family where there never was a hot pepper in the house, I believe. Some people like cats. Other people think cats are something close to a demon. And people have lots of different ideas about kids, especially when they have them. Well, let's talk about Russians. There are a lot of different ideas about Russians. It's all opinions. So reality becomes whatever one believes in. We need to notice our sensory input more directly and clearly. And this is the place of meditation and mindfulness awareness. This helps us calm our mind. It leads to less distortion of sensory input. It leads to more clarity. He mentions samsaric mind, that samsaric mind is characterized by no movement, but a lot of turbulence. For instance, so the emotions are bubbling, you're going back and forth, having all kinds of different emotions, but basically it's a repeat of a soap opera. There really is no movement, no change. What happens is that our mind becomes solid, fixed. It doesn't want to change. But if we can be mindful and aware during our daily lives, this can help weaken our fixations and our obsessions. So this means having a bigger view beyond the box that we live in. And when we can do that, we gain insight into reality. And then we start to begin to see that there is a difference between what is going on in the external world and what we think is going on. He again emphasizes that the world is constantly changing. He uses the example of a table that 2 years later and the table is different. From my own experience, after 2 years, the table might have a few new dings in it or a stain on it. And he talks about clouds, that they gather and they disperse. And that, of course, led my mind to the lyrics from the song Both Sides now. And so I'm going to read the first stanza of that. Judy Collins sang that and made it popular when I was a much younger person. Bows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles in the air and feathered canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way, but now they only block the sun. They rain and snow on everyone. So many things I would have done, but clouds got in my way. I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's clouds' illusions I recall. I really don't know clouds at all. That's just two sides. There's another song about clouds. I think I've got the first few lines memorized. I'm going to give it a try. I am the daughter of earth and water and the nursling of the sky. I pass through the pores of the ocean and shores. I change, but I never die. Okay, enough songs. I'm going to go to a quote here on page 60. How we experience the world rarely fully corresponds to how the world is. Rather, it corresponds with what is in our own mind and makeup, our prejudices and preferences, what is acceptable to us, what is not, our obsessions and fixations. That's the end of the quote. And he then goes on to say that understanding this is profound. It really kind of makes you look deeply into what's going on in your head, your assumptions, beliefs, and so forth, and start questioning. So this is the starting point of understanding both relative reality and ultimate reality when you start seeing this process. So we live in a self-created world, and it is different from the self-created world that others live in. It's no wonder why people disagree with each other. And this world is not out there, it's in here. He uses the phrase freeze frame, that we try to freeze frame our experience and solidify and simplify. So it's very, very important for us to see beyond and go beyond our fixations, to see more panoramically, to experience all the changes. to see that everything is in motion inside and out in reality, meaning that everything is fluid, everything is changing. The reason for this is causes and conditions, that things arise due to causes and conditions, and usually many different causes and conditions. Our mind is constantly moving through the afflictive states of mind. There are 5 main ones, which I'm going to go over briefly. One is aversion, which can be simple irritation. It can be being upset, angry, wanting to get away, wanting to destroy an enemy or destroy what it is that you want to get away from. And then there is desire, passion, wanting to possess, wanting to control, and so forth. And then there is ignorance in terms of indifference, denial, pretending that it doesn't matter or doesn't exist. Sometimes it's called stupidity. And then there is jealousy, which is thinking that another person has a better deal than you do, and then pride, thinking that you have a better deal than other people. And we just keep moving through these over and over and over again. And if you look closely, you will see that there is one that I like to use the term, it's our specialty, as if we're writing out a resume. And then there's another one that we have competency in. It might be that the one that is our specialty is attachment. We like to go out and buy things. And the competency is that we're jealous because other people seem to have better things than we have. Then he gives some definitions here, and this is very important. The first is substantial, and he defines that as it existed right from the beginning. It never came into being. Something that was substantial existed right from the beginning. It was never produced by causes and conditions. And he says that it would have then an essential essence. Insubstantial does not mean that there's no substance. It means that it's produced by causes and conditions, that it doesn't exist by itself, that it lacks permanence, that it depends on causes and conditions. This does not mean non-existence. So I got my laptop here on a table. Now listen to it. Even though it sounds pretty solid, it would be considered insubstantial because it's produced by causes and conditions. Wood needed to come from a tree that had to grow, and then it had to be processed by human beings, made into a table, and so on and so forth. And you had to have the internet and digital devices to be able to have this sound go into your home. So all of this, while it might seem substantial, from a Buddhist definition, it's insubstantial. This is much more than an intellectual understanding. This needs to be felt and understood deep in our minds. And the more you actually understand this, the more flexible your minds become. The next step is to contemplate everything as a product of causes and conditions and has no enduring, unchanging essence. And this is emptiness. And he defines emptiness this way: things do not have any form of enduring essence, and everything is dependently produced. It does not mean things don't exist. This helps us understand samsara and bondage in samsara and the possibility of liberation. Because if samsara was really true, how could you be liberated from it? He says there can't be two realities, relative reality and ultimate reality, and the two being separate. He then quotes Nagarjuna, who is a great Indian scholar who wrote a lot about emptiness. Quote, "Because of emptiness, everything is possible. If emptiness were not true, nothing would be possible." What he is getting at here is because of emptiness, things can change. There's a possibility of transformation, both the good and the bad and the neutral. when negative things happen to us, when we're having a lot of suffering of various kinds, there's always a possibility that that will change, that it will end, become different. And of course, we don't want the good times to end, but they do. But that doesn't mean that that's the end of having good experiences. Emptiness in Buddhism is frequently portrayed in Vajrayana Buddhism as female, because emptiness is pregnant with possibilities. Anything can arise from emptiness, and everything does arise from emptiness. And again, even if we don't see it, everything is changing. It might take a long time to see the changes, but everything is changing. I had a friend of mine over yesterday. He's not a Buddhist, but we're good friends. And I was showing him how I had pointed up the stonework on the center building. And I had done some of it 45 years ago when I built the building. And he mentioned that, oh, the pointing you did back then is weathered, that there was a change in the concrete surface over 45 years. It might have been a slow weathering process, but it definitely changed over 45 years. And of course, if nothing changed, then there was nothing we could do to reduce suffering. We couldn't change ourselves and we couldn't change our circumstances. So then he goes back to the sky analogy. I guess he was talking about clouds earlier. Now he's talking about the sky, and that the sky gives us room. It gives us space to move and do our activities, no matter what they are. Think about it. If there wasn't space, how could you drive your car? It'd be solid. You couldn't go anywhere, couldn't even get into the car. Another aspect of emptiness, besides giving us space and room to grow, is wisdom. And the wisdom mind of the Buddha knows the 3 times, but it also has the quality of compassion and all the other positive emotions that go with it. So we need to see this reality is inseparable from emptiness. It's non-dual. The everyday reality that we live in and emptiness are not 2 different things. If we diligently work to understanding this non-duality, the true nature of reality, there'll be a very significant change internally in your life, how you see others, how you express your emotions, your thought process, how you see the whole world. And there will be this feeling of tremendous space versus claustrophobia. You'll see possibilities, potential. You'll become much more self-confident. Things become easier. Relationships change. You're able to relax. You see, in his words, this subject-object relationship and dependent, not independent. Quote, in this sense, self should be seen in a rational concept rather than a label for a form of self-existing entity, an ego. So here, self is just a rational concept rather than a label. And self depends on the relationship and the point of view. He says you can actually have a number, you yourself can have a lot of different viewpoints of yourself. Sometimes you might be a person that is kind of independent. Another time you're in a relationship with a partner. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a dog owner. They're all different relationships and draw on different parts of who you are. Then he goes on to talk about the container and the contents. And he talks about independent arising or interconnectedness. So because of positive feelings and thoughts, this binds us together with others, but in a good way. It happens naturally. Love and compassion are easily spread around to others. He says it's actually unnatural to have an absence of loving kindness and compassion. And I found that to be a very interesting and important point. So understanding ultimate reality and mundane reality, or the world of appearances, help us lead a fulfilling life. It increases our level of happiness, contentment, and our quality of life. it has the additional benefit of reducing anxiety, suspicion, and paranoia. Another important point that he mentions towards the end is that it helps us know how to enrich oneself. It reduces our dependence on others. Otherwise, in our relationships, there is a subtle or sometimes not so subtle wanting to get something from others, validation, love, approval, recognition. And we never really fully succeed in getting what you seek, that we're trying to fill up, you might say, a void. Quote, if we truly want to try to live our life following the Buddhist path, we need to replenish ourselves through generating positive thoughts and emotions and reflect on our interconnection and interdependence with others and the world, end quote. So the path works when we believe in what we are doing, when we examine, analyze, think, reflect, and contemplate. Those are a lot of different activities, but it's really important to do all of these. Don't go half in. So progress is dependent on our commitment. And he talks about having passion and conviction without becoming a fanatic. And this passion and conviction will propel us forward.